Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are picking up with X-Men issue number 2. Yes, Dawn of X. Oh God, dude, I love Dawn of X. Okay, here's the funny thing about this, right? This story picks up with Cyclops walking in to greet his children, Rachel Summers and Cable. Now, this is gonna blow your mind. Just to give you some history on the complex nature of these characters, right? Just to show you how ridiculously complex the X-Men has been over the years. Here's the origin of these two kids, right? See if you can follow this. I want to see if you can follow this. So Rachel Summers isn't even from this universe. Rachel Summers is from an alternate reality, which you guys know as Days of Future Past. And in this alternate reality, Cyclops and Jean Grey had a child, but it turned out to be Rachel. As most of you guys know, the assassination of Senator Robert Kelly, Moira McTaggart, and Charles Xavier jump-started the Sentinel program, and Sentinels became essentially self-aware and then conquered North America. As a result of that, Rachel Summers, alongside Franklin Richards, Kitty Pryde, Magneto, Colossus, and Wolverine, and I think Storm, basically orchestrated an escape that allowed Rachel Summers to use her powers and send the mind of Kitty Pryde into the past. Kitty Pryde went back, she stopped the events of Days of Future Past from happening, which made the Days of Future Past reality an alternate universe. As a result of that, because it didn't change, Rachel Summers, not knowing that it was now an alternate universe, basically went into the past and then skipped over to the main Marvel universe where she's been ever since. So that's the origin of her character. Cable, just the origin of Cable, it's an absolute mess. Okay, so one day, after Jean Grey died during the events of the Dark Phoenix saga, you ended up learning that she was basically cloned by Mr. Sinister, and this clone's name was Madeline Pryor. And this was done because of the fact that Sinister believed that if Jean Grey and Cyclops ever had a child, that child would be insanely powerful because of the genes of these two characters. And so eventually he sends Madeline Pryor out into the world. Madeline Pryor ends up meeting Cyclops at a family reunion. The two of them hit it off. They start knocking boots. 9 months later, she's given birth to a kid. Cyclops abandoned him. He actually ended up taking off on him because Jean Grey came back. And so he abandoned his wife and his unborn child at the time. The result is that eventually Madeline Pryor gave birth to Nathan Summers, and because of that, the villain Apocalypse, realizing how powerful Cable could be, kidnapped him and then infected him with a techno-organic virus so that if Cable was able to overcome it, then he would prove himself to be worthy. Cyclops gathered together the Inhumans, X-Force, and the X-Men. They battled Apocalypse. They basically managed to push him away, and then Rachel Summers, who had jumped to the future, had basically become a member of a group called the Clan Ascani, who was opposed to Apocalypse, and basically said, give us your baby and then we'll take him to the future and we will essentially try to cure him. If we can't, then we'll clone him and we'll do the next best thing. And so as a result of that, they took baby Nathan to the future in the year 4000 AD. They were not able to cure him, so they ended up cloning him. Apocalypse broke in, realizing that Nathan Summers was now in the future that he ruled, and the result was that they ended up kidnapping the clone instead of the actual baby Nathan. And so baby Nathan grew up to become the character of Cable, who basically hung out with Clan Ascani, and then the clone ended up hanging out with Apocalypse, and his name was Strife. That's the origin of Cable. That's how ridiculous the X-Men have been over the years, right? These two characters with these insanely complex histories are just hanging out with Cyclops. I thought you guys might find that interesting. But the funny thing about this is that what's going on here is there is a massive island that basically popped up about 100 miles off the coast of Krakoa. And the question is, what's going on with this island, right? Like, why is it there? And so as a result of that, Cyclops is basically gathering Rachel Summers and Cable in order to do a recon mission. Now, here's the thing. This is an insanely powerful team. That's one of the things to understand here. They're insanely powerful, right? Like, Cable is an Omega level mutant, albeit that Cable isn't really as powerful as he could be because he has to use his telepathy and telekinesis to keep the techno-organic virus from consuming his body. Rachel Summers is an Omega level telepath, right? Like, she's insanely powerful. And so you're talking about two of the most powerful mutants on the face of the planet who are just going to do a recon mission. Imagine what it's like to be a dad. Like, hey, well, I'd like you guys to meet my son Cable and my daughter Rachel. They're two of the most powerful mutants on the face of the planet. Just don't mess with them. Otherwise, they'll basically make you think that you're a dog and you're gonna spend the rest of your days barking at people and probably locked in a mental institution. It's kind of nuts. But when they get to this island, this island itself really kind of houses like this massive, sort of organism that seems to be coming from the volcanic structure. And so when they immediately get out there and they immediately start looking around, the question they really have to ask here is, what's the purpose behind this? Like what is this thing? The cool thing about this is that as they make their way through, they start to find these signs of life, but they're more herbivores than anything else, right? They found like a giant cow and so on and so forth. So there's nothing of any real threat here until it's consumed by like this giant snake looking thing that leads to like all three of these guys basically like annihilating it, right? Cyclops using his optic beams and Rachel Summers using her telepathy and telekinesis, and then Cable firing off his big guns. But what it does is it basically jumps over to this all white character, right? This character character that actually looks really, really cool, crying like black tears essentially, and then conversing with some individual that we can't see that's either inside of like another portal or something along those lines, but on the side of something else. And he keeps addressing it as mother. But the idea is that mother, the mother of this guy is really telling him like what's going on here. Like these islands are merging together. What you have to do is you have to find him. You have to locate him. He's the one that will lead you, and he's the one that will basically save everything. And so it's really sort of a weird thing, because what we end up learning is this kid is what's called a summoner. Now here's the funny thing about this. This is like Skyrim basically, right? You have like a summoner minor, and you've got a summoner adept, and you've got a high summoner, in the sense that like a summoner minor can summon like lower things, familiars and so on and so forth. And then as you get higher in level, they can summon more and greater things. And so that's when the situation sort of begins to pop off, right? Because when it comes to the character of Cable is very much one of those shoot first, ask questions later kind of guys, right? It's just kind of like, all right, let's just sort of get to it and go from there. Now, when this all white guy, basically this summoner shows up here, it's speaking in a language that none of them understand. And the funny thing is that in reality, they probably could have grabbed Doug Ramsey, they probably could have grabbed Cypher, but as we know from the New Mutant story, Cypher is all the way out in Shi'ar space. This is the reason why we're covering each one of these stories individually, right? Because they all tie into what the other one's doing, but they're all telling their own stories. Plus it's really cool and cohesive when you can just kind of do them all individually and sort of call it a day. The real question becomes what happens when they all start branching off and doing their own thing, and it becomes this unruly mess, which it inevitably will, because it's, comic books. It's the nature of what they do. But they can't really understand the language of this guy. And it's sort of cool because this guy doesn't come here as a villain. It's not as though he's kind of like a bad guy who wants to tear things up and rip things apart. And that was initially almost kind of the way that Hickman played it, was like, this was a bad guy. But this is one of the things to understand about Jonathan Hickman, is that with this guy being a summoner, while he's not overly powerful at the moment, the idea is that at some point along the line, he probably will be. That's the way Hickman does things, right? This character showing up here is going to become insanely important later on down the line, most likely, or is likely going to join the roster of the X-Men. Most likely that's what's going to be the case. But regardless, Cable, in his infinite wisdom, decides to hand off a gift to this guy. And this gift comes in the form of a grenade. And it's kind of crazy here because it's like, I wanted to give him a gift. I wanted to show that we don't mean any harm. So I gave him a thermal grenade. And of course, like this guy presses the button and like detonates the grenade. And so of course that progresses exactly the way we would think it would, when it's kind of like, you tried to kill me, right? So like he immediately starts to lose his mind, not really loses his mind, but basically starts summoning, using his abilities as a summoner, and starts like, introducing like these gigantic monsters. Now, the idea behind this is that he's able to summon beings or summon monsters from what's called Otherworld or Outer World. And the reason why that matters is because it's very, very much akin to like Asgard. Like we've talked about that before, that in every universe in Marvel Comics, you have what are called pocket dimensions. And these are dimensions that are astronomically small, right? In the sense that like, they're not as big as universes. They're just really small spaces that you can't just walk to. You usually have to pass some kind of dimensional barrier or have a portal opened. In the case of Asgard, the Bifrost is open, which is basically a portal that allows you to access Asgard. But this place Otherworld is the exact same way. The difference is that Otherworld exists outside of the multiverse, right? It's not confined to a singular universe, but the principle still remains the same. And the overall gist here is that what you end up having is this summoner basically bringing beasts from what Jonathan Hickman describes as the lands beyond Otherworld, essentially like the wild lands. And the reason why this matters is because Otherworld itself is a giant landmass, right? There's different areas that are there, like you have King Arthur's Camelot and so on and so forth. But a lot of the areas outside of that are unexplored or unexplained by Marvel. So we don't really know what's there. And it's one of those things where Hickman is just kind of saying like, there's wild stuff out there. And basically this summoner can bring those things to this location and then use them for whatever it is that he wants to achieve, right? Like these wild and fantastic beasts from out there. So the reality is that he's not summoning them from places that we're familiar with. He's just summoning it from way out in Otherworld. So they're just kind of crazy beasts and monsters and so on and so forth. And so in the middle of this great big huge fight, Rachel Summers ends up using her telepathy. And what she does is communicate with this guy directly. And then of course, that's when everything ceases. And the question is, why did you try to destroy me? And it's like, well, I didn't mean to destroy you. Like I meant to give you a gift. And I just kind of wanted to show you that like, hey, we're good guys here. Like we're not really bad guys, which is a pretty important message to communicate, right? Like, hey, like, please don't kill us. We're just here to be cool. Like, we don't want to cause problems or anything like that. And so it's kind of funny because the question is asked by Scott Summers, why is your island coming over to our island? And that's when we really kind of harken back to the events of House and Powers of X. And this is Araco. That's what this island is. If you guys remember back during the House and Powers of X, the Krakoa was originally one giant landmass. So you had Araco, which was one island, and you had Krakoa, which is the other. And because of the fact that these kind of demons or monsters monsters were sort of rising up from the rift in between these two places, that with the scheming of Apocalypse and using his 4 horsemen, that ultimately these monsters and demons were suppressed and the island was essentially split. And so those horsemen of Apocalypse would stay on Araco and ensure those monsters and demons would never show up again. And that was kind of like the role they would play. They were sort of the hidden horsemen that we didn't really know about. And so what this does is basically say that like this island is now returned. The Krakoa is now a fully cohesive unit, and it's basically merged itself with Araco. It's back to its normal self. But because of the fact that all this is based on the fact that these islands were split, what it does is go exactly where we expect it to, in the sense that you've got this guy just kind of out there doing his own thing and sort of analyzing this new location that he's in, having never seen the surface world before. And he's met by the arrival of Apocalypse. And Apocalypse basically speaks the exact same language as him, and understands exactly what he's saying. And it's like, I've never met you before. Like, who is your mother? Like who was it that gave birth to you? To which he replies, I was born by war. I was born by the Horsemen War. And so it's cool because what it means now is the Horsemen are procreating, right? They're kind of keeping themselves going and propagating and so on and so forth. And so ultimately, it's really Hickman kind of setting the stage for what comes next. Insofar as this guy basically says the forces that the Horsemen were sent to keep contained are returning. They're coming back. And so we're going to have to like marshal forces or what have you in order to stave these guys off. Now, keep in mind, this was not an easy fight for Apocalypse to win. Apocalypse and his horsemen had to work in unison and put on one heck of a fight in order to achieve this. The reason why I say that matters and the reason why it's so cool here is because knowing Jonathan Hickman, there'll be a pretty significant battle that'll take place. And when it does, we'll get to see the full totality of Apocalypse's powers put on display, which I am very excited about. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.